My name is Thaddeus, and I fell in love with a man who was already taken by a ghost. I met Ambrose at a gallery opening in Burlington, Vermont, during one of those endless winter nights when the cold makes everything feel more intimate. He stood alone in front of a painting of two figures walking away from each other, and something about his stillness drew me like gravity. "Beautiful piece," I said, moving to stand beside him. "It's called After," he replied, his voice carrying the weight of unspoken stories. "The artist painted it after losing someone. I should have recognized the warning then. Should have seen how he studied the painting like he was searching for something he'd lost. Instead, I saw the sharp line of his jaw, the way lamplight caught in his dark hair, and felt something shift in my chest. I'm Thaddeus. Ambrose." He turned to look at me then, and for a moment, his gray eyes focused completely on mine. "Would you like to get coffee?" That first night, we talked until dawn about art and books, and the way snow looked falling past streetlights. He was brilliant, funny, achingly beautiful. When he kissed me goodbye outside my apartment, it felt like the beginning of everything. I didn't know I was walking into someone else's story. Those first weeks with Ambrose felt like discovering a new country. He taught literature at the University of Vermont, and I could listen to him talk about poetry for hours. The way his hands moved when he explained metaphors, how his voice softened when he read Neruda or Dickinson, everything about him fascinated me. We spent Thanksgiving together in my cabin outside Stowe, cooking too much food and talking about our families. He told me about growing up in Maine, about parents who never understood his love of books, about finding home in words when nowhere else felt safe. "What about you?" he asked as we sat by the fire. "What's your story?" I told him about graphic design, about moving to Vermont for the piece, about never having found someone who made me want to stay in one place before him. When I said that last part, something flickered across his face. Pain, maybe, or recognition. "Careful," he said softly. "People don't always stay." "I'm not going anywhere." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That's what they all say." I started noticing things in February. How Ambrose would go quiet on certain dates, staring out windows with an expression I couldn't read. The way he flinched when I rearranged books on his shelf, as if I'd disrupted some sacred order. A coffee mug in his cabinet that he never used, never even seemed to see, but somehow I knew not to touch. "Who's Marcus?" I asked one evening, finding a letter addressed to him mixed in with Ambrose's mail. The color drained from Ambrose's face. "Where did you find that?" "It was just there in the stack. I wasn't snooping, It's old mail." He took the letter, hands shaking slightly. "Sometimes things get forwarded by mistake." But I'd seen the postmark. The letter was only 3 months old. That night, Ambrose made love to me with desperate intensity, clinging to me like I might disappear. Afterward, as he slept, I lay awake wondering who Marcus was and why his name could shatter my boyfriend's composure so completely. I tried to let it go, tried to focus on what Ambrose and I had instead of dwelling on shadows. But the signs were everywhere once I started looking. The way he tensed when couples walked past us holding hands. How he never wanted to go to certain restaurants or coffee shops. The careful way he avoided talking about his past relationships. "How long have you been single?" I asked one night as we cooked dinner together. "A while." "How long is a while?" He stopped chopping vegetables, his knuckles white around the knife handle. "Does it matter?" "It matters to me." 2 years, he said finally. "Give or take." "What happened?" The knife clattered to the cutting board. "Thaddeus, please. I can't. I don't want to talk about it." The pain in his voice made me drop the subject, but it didn't make the questions go away. If anything, his refusal to talk made me more curious, more concerned about what kind of ghost we were living with. The truth came out by accident in March. We were at a faculty party, and I was talking to one of Ambrose's colleagues when she mentioned how good it was to see him happy again. "After what happened with Marcus," she said, We weren't sure he'd ever. She stopped, seeing my confused expression. Oh, I thought you knew. My blood turned to ice. Knew what? About the accident. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. But she'd already said too much. That night, after Ambrose fell asleep, I did what I should have done months ago. I searched Marcus's name online. Marcus Thorne, 28, killed in a car accident 2 years ago. Survived by his partner, Ambrose Chun, who'd been driving. Who'd walked away with minor injuries while the man he loved died in the passenger seat. Suddenly everything made sense. The guilt, the careful distance, the way Ambrose sometimes looked at me like he was seeing someone else. I wasn't his boyfriend. I was Marcus's replacement. I know about Marcus, I said the next morning over coffee. Ambrose went very still. What do you know? I know he died. I know you were driving. I know you blame yourself. The mug slipped from his hands, shattering against the kitchen floor. Coffee spread across the tiles like spilled blood. You have no idea what you're talking about, he whispered. Then tell me. Help me understand why you're punishing yourself. Why you're punishing us. There is no us. The words exploded out of him. There's just you trying to fill a space that belongs to someone else. Someone who's never coming back because of me. The rawness in his voice broke something in my chest. I knelt beside him as he picked up pieces of broken ceramic, his hands shaking. Ambrose, it wasn't your fault. You don't know that. I know you. I know you wouldn't hurt anyone intentionally. He looked up at me then, tears streaming down his face. But I did hurt him. I killed him. And every day I wake up wishing it had been me instead. The story came out in pieces over the following weeks. How Marcus had been brilliant and kind and everything Ambrose thought he didn't deserve. How they'd been together for 3 years, planning a future that included marriage and maybe children. How one night, driving home from dinner, a drunk driver had run a red light and changed everything forever. He was laughing, Ambrose told me one evening as we sat by the lake, telling some stupid joke about his students. The last thing I heard him say was my name, and then, he shuddered. I should have been faster. Should have seen the other car coming. You couldn't have known. Everyone says that. The therapists, his parents, my friends. But they weren't there. They didn't see his face when he realized what was happening. I wanted to take his pain away, to find the right words that would heal 2 years of guilt and grief. But I was beginning to understand that some wounds run too deep for words. Do you love me? I asked quietly. Yes. The answer came without hesitation. God help me, yes. But you love him more. Ambrose was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. I love him differently. He's part of me, Thaddeus. He's in every breath I take, every book I read, every morning I wake up. You can't compete with that because it's not a competition. It's just, what is? Marcus's parents came to town in April for the anniversary of his death. I wasn't supposed to meet them. Ambrose had planned to see them alone, but fate intervened when we ran into them at the bookstore. You must be Thaddeus, Mrs. Thorne said, and I was struck by how much warmth there was in her voice. Marcus would have liked you. The comment hit me like a physical blow. Not because it was cruel, but because it was kind. Because it suggested that loving Ambrose didn't require erasing Marcus, that there might be room for both of us in whatever this was. Thank you, I managed. Later, at dinner, Mr. Thorne pulled me aside. He's been different since he met you. Lighter. Marcus would have wanted that for him. I don't think Ambrose sees it that way. No, he wouldn't. But grief isn't logical, son. It just is. And sometimes the only way through it is with someone who cares enough to walk through it with you. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in May. I'd been patient, understanding, willing to compete with a ghost for Ambrose's heart. But when I found him crying over a photo of Marcus, when he flinched away from my touch and whispered Marcus's name instead of mine, something in me snapped. I can't do this anymore, I said. Ambrose looked up, startled. What? I can't keep pretending that I'm enough when I'm not. I can't keep loving someone who wishes I was someone else. That's not, isn't it? I pulled out my phone, showing him the search history I'd found on his laptop. Marcus's social media accounts, photos, articles about the accident. You visit his grave every week. You keep his things. You compare everything I do to what he would have done. I don't. You do. And I understand why. I know you loved him. I know losing him nearly destroyed you. But I'm not him, Ambrose. I'm never going to be him. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. I need time, he said finally. How much time? I don't know. I moved back to my cabin, threw myself into work, tried to pretend that my heart wasn't breaking. Friends called, offered sympathy and advice I didn't want to hear. The worst part was how much I understood Ambrose's position. How could I compete with perfect memory, with love that would never disappoint or change or leave? But understanding didn't make it hurt less. 3 weeks into our separation, Ambrose showed up at my door. He looked terrible, hollow-eyed, thinner, like he'd been fighting a war with himself. I've been seeing someone, he said, a therapist, about the guilt, the grief, about us. And she says I've been trying to love you the same way I loved Marcus. But you're not Marcus, and that's not fair to either of you. I wanted to let him in, to fall into his arms and pretend the last month hadn't happened. But I'd learned something about myself in our time apart, that I deserved to be someone's first choice, not their consolation prize. What are you saying? I'm saying I want to learn how to love you as you are, not as a replacement for someone else. It wasn't easy. Love, I learned, wasn't just about feeling. It was about choosing every day to see the person in front of you instead of the ghost in your memory. Ambrose had to learn that loving me didn't mean betraying Marcus, and I had to learn that being second didn't necessarily mean being less. We started over slowly, dating again, getting to know each other without the shadow of comparison hanging over us. Ambrose began talking about Marcus not as a perfect memory but as a real person. Flawed, complex, human. Someone who would have wanted him to be happy. He had terrible taste in movies, Ambrose told me one night as we walked along Lake Champlain. Used to make me watch these awful action films. And he left dishes in the sink, drove too fast, sang off-key in the shower. Sounds annoying. Ambrose smiled. The first real smile I'd seen from him in months. He was. And I loved him anyway. Past tense. Past tense, he agreed. I love you now. Present tense. Future tense if you'll have me. Learning to love someone haunted meant accepting that ghosts don't disappear. They just find their proper place in the story. Marcus would always be part of Ambrose's history, but I was his present, his future. We moved in together that fall, creating something new instead of trying to resurrect something dead. Ambrose kept one photo of Marcus, but he put away the shrine. He still visited the grave, but now he took me with him sometimes, introducing me not as a replacement but as someone who'd helped him find his way back to living. I used to think loving someone meant holding on so tight you couldn't let go, he told me one evening as we cooked dinner together. But maybe it means holding on just tight enough to keep them safe while still leaving room for them to breathe. Is that what you're doing with me? I'm trying. It was enough. We were enough. Winter came again, and with it, the anniversary of the night everything changed. But this time, instead of spending it alone with his guilt, Ambrose spent it with me. We lit candles, talked about Marcus, the real man, not the perfect ghost, and acknowledged the strange gift that tragedy had given us. I wouldn't have met you if he hadn't died, Ambrose said quietly. Do you regret that? I regret that he died. I'll always regret that. But I can't regret loving you. That night, we made love with a tenderness that transcended physical desire. It was healing, communion, the sacred act of two broken people making each other whole. Ambrose whispered my name. Only my name. And when he looked at me afterward, I saw only myself reflected in his eyes. I love you, he said. Not because you replaced him, but because you showed me it was possible to love again. I love you too. All of you. Even the parts that still hurt. Spring returned to Vermont like a promise kept. Ambrose and I planted a garden behind the house we now shared, working the soil with our hands, talking about the future we were building together. Not the future he'd planned with Marcus, but something entirely our own. Marry me, he said one evening as we sat on the porch, watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. The proposal wasn't dramatic or elaborate, just a quiet question offered with steady hands and clear eyes. The ring was simple, white gold with a single stone, nothing like the ornate piece he'd chosen for Marcus years ago. Yes, I said, because sometimes the most important answers are the simplest ones. We married in October, surrounded by friends and family and the golden light of autumn. Marcus's parents came, crying happy tears and telling me how proud they were to have me in their family. It was a beginning, not an ending, proof that love doesn't diminish when it's shared. That night, in our bed, in our home, Ambrose made love to me with the passion of a man finally free from the weight of the past. We were sweaty and breathless and completely present with each other, creating something beautiful from the ashes of what had been lost. No ghosts, I asked afterward, tracing patterns on his chest. No ghosts, he confirmed. Just us. I'd thought I could never compete with a perfect memory, but I'd learned something important. You don't compete with ghosts by trying to replace them. You compete by refusing to become one yourself, by insisting on being real, flawed, gloriously alive. Ambrose had been haunted when I met him, and in some ways he always would be. But now he was haunted and happy, carrying his love for Marcus not as a burden but as a reminder of how precious and fragile love could be. We were both real now, both present, both committed to writing a story that honored the past while embracing the future. It wasn't the love story either of us had originally planned, but it was ours, and that made it perfect.